If you've been dreaming about a place where life feels a little more intentional, discover the Canopy in Sebastopol by City Ventures. This new community offers solar-powered homes, surrounded by mature trees, nature preserves, and walking trails, with a vibrant local downtown, renowned wineries, and the Bay Area all within easy reach. Enjoy low-maintenance living, refined design, and built-in eco-friendly features that make everyday life easier. Start your next chapter at the Canopy by City Ventures. Visit cityventures.com. That's cityventures.com.
Welcome to Radical Personal Finance. My name is Joshua. Years ago, I heard some intelligent person make this pithy statement. You know, it's good to talk to winners about why they have won and all the things that were necessary in their victory. But we shouldn't only talk to winners. We should talk to losers also and see if we can figure out why they lost, why they failed. We shouldn't only ask a wealthy person how they got rich. We should go and talk to some bankrupt people and say, how did you go bankrupt? Tell us, so that we can avoid those mistakes. And at the time, that seemed like a really good idea to me. I thought, that's a good one. I'm going to take that philosophy and file that away. And if I ever talk to a bankrupt person, then I'm going to learn all about bankruptcy. And by the way, I actually do think this is a pretty good idea. I think this is a good idea because we often will get more valuable and more useful information by talking with people who have failed at things and by talking about those who are successful. I think this is because when you look at people who are at the very top of the success ladder in some field, it can be hard to identify one specific causal factor that have created that success. So, you know, you'll be talking with a movie star who is talking about, you know, his how he got so buff for this latest action figure role that he's playing. And he says, well, it was just all the chicken and the rice. Well, it was the chicken and the rice, and it was also the trend, right? It was also the drugs. Or you'll talk to somebody who is incredibly athletic, a sports superstar, and you say, how is it that you are so athletic and so capable? And they'll say, man, it's just discipline and hard work. Well, it absolutely is discipline and hard work. It's also having world-class genetics. Or, you know, somebody who's extremely wealthy and you say, how did you get so wealthy? And they say, man, I scrimped and I saved and I was really careful and I watched every dollar. Well, that's true. But it's also true that you hit a lucky part in the market, right? Or a rising market that helped you with a lot of the mistakes, and you hit a technology curve. Now, that doesn't take anything away from the successes of that person. I don't think it's any less impressive that the person was able to achieve great success just because there were multiple factors more than the person was able to identify. But what is hard to know what to do is, how do I apply that person's success to my own life? After all, how do I recreate that market condition that led to that success? And it's really true that studying from failure in many cases is more productive. Because I think that while not all of us can be number one in any particular field, most of us can be pretty good in a field, right? Middle of the road or higher, if we could simply avoid the big mistakes, avoid the failures. And so we do know that while we can't determine whether you for sure have elite genetics or not, we do know that if you quit and you don't practice stick-to-itiveness and practice grit and keep on going at something, well, then you're certainly not going to win. So we can file that away and know that that's true, right? We can't know exactly what drug dosage you should take to help improve your muscles, but we can know that if you don't stick to your diet, then it's not going to be as successful and you're probably not going to be ready for the big screen. So I actually do believe that this theory is a useful theory and a useful idea, because for most of us, all we really need to do is just avoid the long-term failures. Now, it's easy to say that when you're the one interviewing people about their failures. It's harder to want to say that when you're the one who has failed. And yet, I believe that it's my responsibility to, if I'm going to ask people about their failures, to also talk about some of the lessons that I have learned. And so I'll share with you in today's podcast, I want to share with you some important lessons learned from dozens of my own unsuccessful attempts to become lean and healthy. Recently, I had the good fortune of hitting my college weight, which was a weight that I really had not been at in quite a long time. Unfortunately, my college weight was 335 pounds. And unfortunately, I recently stepped on a scale after a while of not being around a scale, and it came in at 335 pounds. And what that means is over the last 6 years, I have gained 100 pounds of excess fat and excess body weight. I don't say that proudly. It snuck up on me just like it always does. I remember the time about 6 years ago. I remember the podcast that I recorded where I talked about the carnivore diet. And I shared with you how I had lost a lot of weight on the carnivore diet. And I was enjoying a new low body weight. I went and checked my records. It was 234 pounds. That was my low body weight. And I remember even as I was recording that podcast, I thought, you know what? I think I'm doing something good here. But I thought, am I jinxing myself? What's going on? I don't believe in jinxing myself in that context. But you kind of have that voice at the back of your head that says, if I talk about this, is that going to lower my resolve to continue? And I remember after doing that podcast, I was consistent with the carnivore diet for a little while longer. Then there was a holiday that followed up, and I had determined that, okay, on this date, I'm going to go ahead and engage in the holiday food. And I just couldn't quite go back to the carnivore diet. And of course, when you eat a certain way and you get fat, then you go on a diet and you lose the fat, and then you stop eating the way that helped you to lose the fat, and you go back to eating the way that made you fat in the first place. Guess what? You're going to get fat. And so over the last 6 years, I have gotten fat again. And lots of reasons for it, but the fundamental reason is just excess eating, overeating. I went and did the math on this, which, by the way, if you are lean and healthy, you're not going to need anything I have to share with you because there's going to be no surprises. But the truth is that half of us are obese. And so I have had many, many unsuccessful attempts at losing weight and keeping it off. And I am in the beginning stage of another successful attempt. And I hope optimistically that this attempt will be the one that is successful for the long term. I've lost over the last month and a half, I've lost a good solid 20 pounds of body fat, down 2 inches on my stomach, which is really important because as I'll share in a moment, the problem is this time around, in the past, I've always just been fat. This time around, I've had health symptoms, which have been no fun. That's what has really woken me up to the work that I have to do. And I'll share with you on that in a moment. But I've learned a lot from these unsuccessful attempts. And so I don't know how many it is, a dozen. Well, I'll just say, right? I don't know how many times I have made an attempt to get lean and healthy. The first attempt that I made was when I was in 8th grade. And for whatever reason, I'll talk about the reasons in a moment. For whatever reason, when I was in 8th grade, I became very heavy. If I recall correctly, I was up to 260 pounds or so in 8th grade. And I learned about the Atkins diet. And at that time, I went on the Atkins diet. I lost about 50 or 60 pounds, felt really good, was doing really well, was lighter through high school. In college, I started eating all the crazy food at the cafeteria. I had bad habits. Body weight went up again. At the end of college, I lost weight again. And I've gone through this yo-yo cycle many, many times. Over the years, I've done a variety of diets, mostly low carb type diets, right? Atkins diets and keto. And I did the 1 meal a day diet for a long time. I liked that one when I was working for a while. About the only diets that I haven't really done were calorie counting, which has been something that I'll explain in a moment, and things like veganism. I got interested in vegetarianism and veganism for a time. I had a friend who was convinced that all the scientific literature was in favor of veganism. So I got interested in it, started researching it really heavily, and then basically became convinced. I'd never had seen really any long-term vegans that seemed like healthy people. It seems like everyone who goes vegan, their health improves for a short time because they cut out a lot of junk. But I just couldn't find anybody that was strong and vigorous after many, many years of that. And so I said, you got to trust your eyes if nothing else. Anyway, so those are about the only things that I haven't done over the years. I've done tons of kinds of exercise, right? I've been in the gym a bunch of times. I've lifted traditional weightlifting. I've done CrossFit multiple times at multiple boxes over the years. I've done some sports. There were times where I've run. I ran a half marathon. I went out intending to do the marathon, but I didn't train. I got knocked off and I did the half marathon. So that's about as far as I've run. But I've done a lot of different things. I joined a swim club one time. I've done a bunch of different things. And yet all of these things have been unsuccessful. All right, many attempts, and yet they're all unsuccessful. And the question is, why? And so the first lesson I want to share with you from the many unsuccessful attempts that I have made to be lean and healthy is that in all good change plans, it's important to identify the actual cause of the problem. In financial planning, I have a mental checklist that I go down. If I have 10 minutes to talk to somebody, I'm going to ask a few questions. And in my mind is a very, very simple set of questions that I'm going in. So number one, I want to find out what the person's current net worth is. How many assets does the person have? How much debt does the person have? Then very quickly, I want to figure out where the assets are, because the kinds of assets that somebody owns are going to show me what that person has done in the past. If somebody owns a business, for example, that's valued at $200,000, but they don't have much money in their retirement accounts, and their debt is in the form of an SBA loan or credit card debt, that tells me something that's a totally different story than if somebody's assets are, a Range Rover and a Hummer H2 and a ski boat. And if the person's debts are all debts associated with those vehicles, right? Those tell a very different story of what somebody has. It tells me something if a person has assets in a retirement account or if a person doesn't have assets in a retirement account. So I quickly want to find out just basically, where is this person? What assets, what liabilities does the person have? And what kinds of assets and what kinds of liabilities are they? I then want to find out about the income. And I want to basically figure out how much money is the person making and compare that to the assets. And then I want to ask about their expenses. And I want to get an idea of that, because with these three basic data points, what are the assets? I guess we can call it four, right? Net worth is net worth, which is assets and liabilities, and then income and expenses. We can pretty much have a pretty good idea of a story. If somebody comes along and that person has a high income and high expenses and low assets, then we know where to intervene. We're going to intervene on the expense side of the situation in order to build assets. If somebody comes along with a moderate or a low income and high expenses and not a lot of assets, then we know where to intervene, right? We've got to intervene on the income side of the ledger. And we want to really just focus in what's going to help this person to flourish. Is it making more money or is it spending less money? You don't go into a family where, let's say there's a family with 4 children and a household income of $60,000 and start jumping up and down and say, you've got to spend less money. But you can go into a family with one child that has a household income of $200,000 that doesn't have any assets and go in and jump up and down and say, you got to spend less money, right? Those are very different situations. Similarly, with regard to expenses or debts even, you don't go into a guy who bought a business and the business failed and now he's got a personal loan that he's paying off or a bunch of credit card debt from, several years of no income and yell at him to lower his expenses in the way that you do if somebody just has frivolous consumer spending. So we've got to identify it. And that's the first step in financial planning. Well, it's the same thing, I think, in terms of being fit and healthy. I think a health coach is what my health coach has been doing with me, but a health coach is going to try to figure out, let's get the lay of the land, right? What's going on? And that's going to include, where is this person in terms of his or her physical state? How much do you weigh? What does your body look like? That's going to tell a story of what's going on. Then, of course, there are going to be some health markers or some exercise markers that are going to make a difference. Blood tests, maybe data from as far as aerobic capacity, things like that. And then, of course, the person's going to want to get an idea of what's going on in terms of food intake and in terms of exercise, right? So that's going to be the parallel between these two things. It's going to tell the story. And over the years, I've tried to self-diagnose myself from my many unsuccessful attempts. I'll generally avoid the F word on this podcast because I'm trying to frame things as unsuccessful attempts, right? Thomas Edison famously tried 10,000 ways to make a light bulb before he was able to and he found 10,000 ways that didn't work. So I have found dozens of ways that have not worked to be lean and healthy, and I'm still looking for the ways that will work. But as we look at these unsuccessful attempts, over the years, I thought, what's the problem? Right? What is the problem? Why am I so overweight? Because truthfully, I stand by this statement. I don't eat a bad diet, at least compared to a lot of other people. Meaning that in my family growing up and also my life as an adult, I have basically never eaten a standard American diet. We eat fairly clean. I just basically eat meat and vegetables and some breads and sugars on the side, but I just eat fairly clean, right? I don't eat a lot of junk. I don't eat a lot of processed foods. And so I wondered over the years, I thought maybe my hormones are out of whack, right? Maybe there's something wrong with my thyroid. Maybe I have some medical condition and there's a bug in my stomach that is causing me to not be able to lose weight. Until I've looked at the data. And this is what is so important, is to actually collect data. And the truth is, I calculated this. The truth is that every single time I've actually done a careful measurement of my food intake, I just wind up eating in a calorie surplus. And what's so crazy when you reflect on 100-pound weight gain over the last 6 years is, you know how many calories are necessary to accomplish a 100-pound weight gain in 6 years, excess calories? 150 excess calories per day. All of my weight gain can be accounted for by a 150 calorie per day caloric surplus. About 1,000 calories a week. It's not hard for me to overeat by 1,000 calories. It's not hard for me to scarf down an extra 1,000 calories once a week. It's certainly not hard for me to have an extra caloric consumption of 150 calories a day. And that is all that is necessary to account for my 100-pound weight gain. Isn't that shocking? Similarly, when you look at wealth, you find kind of a similar thing, is that in many cases, a slightly high expense amount or, a slightly low savings rate is really the difference between poverty and wealth. All the stuff that I don't talk about as much as I should, but that about starting when you're 18, starting when you're 20 and saving $100 a month, that stuff really does work. And the truth is, if I had learned how to eat in 100 calorie a day surplus, or even a 50 calorie a day surplus, or just at maintenance calories and 100 calories a week, then that would have been enough for me to stay lean and get leaner. And yet I didn't. That's a pretty sobering thing. So the lesson I've learned from various unsuccessful attempts to become fit and healthy is that a little bit of effort goes a long way over a long time. Speaking of time, that is another lesson. So in the past, I have always been attracted to quick results. I tend to be one who has a fairly extreme, intense personality, and I'm pretty emotional. I tend to be super on, super passionate, or super off. And it's not always it doesn't always give you great results, but that's who I am, right? That's the personality that I have. I work to measure it and learn and plan around it, but that's pretty much how I am. The good thing is, when I'm super on, I can usually produce a lot, right? When I'm feeling great and I'm motivated and I'm clear, my level of output is enormous. But then, of course, I go through these cycles of the ups and downs, and then it doesn't feel real great when you're stuck in a depressive cycle where things aren't working. So over the years, whenever I've gotten super motivated with regard to getting fit and healthy and lean, I tend to want to go all the way. I tend to want to go hardcore, especially when I was younger. And so over the years, I have lost a lot of weight, hundreds and hundreds of pounds of weight loss when you total it all up. And I have never, ever wanted to lose weight slowly. Last time around when I was doing the carnivore diet, I remember having an argument with my sister. And she was saying, Joshua, the slower you can lose the weight, the better. And I wasn't interested. I was losing weight fast. I wanted to lose weight fast. And I had no interest in doing something slow. Well, one of the common components of all of my unsuccessful attempts to be lean and healthy is that I've always wanted fast results. And something's different this time. I think part of it is due to being older than 40, my midlife crisis, my children are getting older. I just have a different perspective on time. But this time, the idea of losing weight slowly really clicks with me. I have these mountains of evidence that tell me that losing weight has led me to be unsuccessful with the long-term goal of being lean and healthy. Every single time. Losing weight quickly, it hasn't worked. It hasn't been successful at the goal of being lean and healthy. It's been successful at the goal of losing weight quickly, but that's not the actual goal. The actual goal is to be lean and healthy and strong and fit and athletic, and it hasn't worked. And so I recognized the parallels between this experience with weight and what we see with money. With money, we say to people, well, when you come into a windfall, be careful. Right? The most important thing about becoming a millionaire is becoming a millionaire. And that's clearly the case with regard to being lean and healthy and fit and athletic. Right? The most important thing about becoming lean and healthy and fit and athletic is becoming the kind of person who is lean and healthy and fit and athletic, not becoming the kind of person who can just deprive himself of food and for a short period of time, for 3 months, 6 months, 8 months, whatever is necessary to lose 50 or 100 pounds, and then be done with it. That's not going to work. And what's interesting is, as I've reflected on this, y'all know I've done podcasts about how I regret pursuing like the fast options. I regret pursuing the hacks. I've done various podcasts on this. The same thing is so clearly true with regard to losing weight, being fit, lean, and healthy, is that pursuing the fast path was never a good plan. So this time around, my charts, again, back to the one 6 years ago, I made a chart, and I remember charting out the goal weight loss. And my goal was to be so far under that goal weight loss that I was going to be proud of myself. And I would weigh myself every day, and I would put it up there on my chart on the wall, kept it physically at that time, and I was always so far ahead. This time, 0.5% or less of body weight per week. That's my goal. 0.5% or less, meaning that I'm targeting 0.5% right now. In order to, I have a bunch of visceral fat, which I have to get rid of because that's super, super unhealthy, which is causing health symptoms for the first time in my life. We'll talk about that in a moment. So I want to go fast right now. But as soon as I probably get under 300 pounds, then I'm going to go down from 0.5% per week. And I want to go down to 0.25% of body weight, somewhere between 0.25% and 0.5% of body weight per week, which is very slow. But I have to become a different person. I have to become a different person. And that's something that can't happen in extremity. That's something that can't happen when I'm being extreme. I'm very good at discipline for short periods of time. I'm very bad at slow changes over time. And yet, if this current attempt is going to be successful, it has to be different from the past attempts. See, of course, the same parallel with money. Right? If you're super fit and athletic, you're probably good with money, by the way, but the same thing is there, right? Small attempts, small changes really do pay off because they compound over time and they're consistent and they're doable. Let me jump straight to the symptoms. I'll go out of order with my plan. So here's what shocked me a couple months ago. You say, Joshua, well, if you gained 100 pounds over 6 years and you didn't really pay attention, you didn't really even notice it until the most recent 20 pounds, what changed? What changed was a few months ago, I got a hypertension warning on my Apple Watch. And I had never before had a negative health symptom, meaning that I've been obese my whole life. And of course, I know intellectually that obesity is really bad for you. But in the past, my heart was fine. My blood pressure was fine, at least when I measured them. I wore a continuous glucose monitor last year, and my blood sugar was fairly low. I went and did some blood tests, and they were okay. Depending on how you interpreted them, my glucose was a little bit high, as would be expected from an obese person, but it wasn't shockingly high. And so I kind of put it off for a year. But then I got that hypertension warning on my Apple Watch a few months ago. I thought, hypertension. That's a first. And then a couple weeks later, I got another one. And I said, something has to change. Because when you see the negative impact of your decisions, that's really rough. And I always thought aesthetics would be motivating to me. Right? I always thought that the goal of weight loss was aesthetics, right? It was the magazine fitness model cover. It was the six pack, but it was the special dates for a reunion or a wedding or whatever. But for whatever reason, those things have never actually been motivating for me long term. And yet this hypertension warning was very motivating to me. And what that led to was I wound up starting to work with a coach, a health coach. He's a doctor. His name is Dr. Ashori. He's been a member of the radical personal finance community for a long time. And so he had reached out to me, and I'd kind of ignored his messages for a while, not due to anything other than busyness. And he'd sent me one last message like, hey, Joshua, you've talked about being fat. Would you like to, I can help you with that. Would you like me to help you with that? And so I responded back to him and started talking about it. And one of the things that I learned was different was at this time around, a lot of my fat is visceral fat. And if you were ignorant about this like I was, there's two types, as I understand it now. Again, not a doctor, not an expert, just telling you from lessons learned from unsuccessful attempts. But as I understand it, there's two types of fat in the human body. There's subcutaneous fat, which is basically ugly, right? Because it makes us puffy and lumpy and kind of gross looking. But it's not particularly unhealthy because it's basically metabolically stable. And then there's visceral fat. And visceral fat is all of the fat that gets around our organs. And it's really unhealthy. And it can really affect how our organs are. And so I did a DEXA scan, and that plus my belly measurements, all of it indicates that I have a substantial level of visceral fat, which I need to lose quickly. And that's the difference. And so as I was talking it through with Dr. Ashori, I think one of the things that we discussed is that the difference with losing all the weight the way I've done it in the past many times is that this time around, this 100 pounds that I added on, this time around it's gone to my visceral fat, right? Fat around my organs. And that is, it's an emergency, right? You have to get rid of that. And it makes me feel so ashamed of having squandered the genetic heritage that I was given, right? My ancestors gave me a great genetic heritage. I am strong. I am healthy. I am robust. I come from a long-lived family. God willing, if I don't die in some kind of silly accident or some other acute illness or something like that, then there's a good chance that I will be a centenarian based upon my genetic heritage. And yet here I sit, squandering that, right? Imagine how pathetic it would be for me to have a heart attack at 53 years old when there's nobody in my ancestors that has heart attacks. Imagine how disrespectful that would be towards my ancestors, right? Imagine how horrible it would be to have diabetes when nobody in my family has diabetes. Imagine how disrespectful that would be. And so for whatever reason, where aesthetics was never particularly, like I always thought it was going to be motivating to me, but in reality it wasn't, this is. And I think to tie this into money for a moment, I think this is really, that there is a really clear parallel here, is that if you're going to have compelling financial results, you're going to wind up having those results for your reasons and your reasons alone. Some people are motivated by purchasing flashy things, fancy cars, fancy motorcycles, beautiful homes, beautiful yachts. Some people are motivated by living in a little house and accumulating millions of dollars, which they leave to their alma mater when they die. Some people are motivated by how much money they can stack up, and some people are motivated by how much money they can give away. And I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with either of these approaches. The key is to understand what motivates you and to recognize that the goal is for you to become the kind of person who is able to achieve your goals. That's really the goal. And so if aesthetics are not compelling to you, what I could have done, what I should have done, is to discuss the fact years ago that aesthetics are not compelling, but then to try to lay out an idea of what would be compelling. And I have always cared about honoring my ancestors and honoring the heritage that I've been given. I have never felt like being obese is very dishonoring, right? I've always felt it's dishonoring to God. It's dishonoring to the heritage that I was given. It's embarrassing. I don't know whether, we talk about, should you see it as a moral failure or not? And if I were confident that there were no moral failure in it, then I wouldn't be bothered by it. But since I know the small excesses, right? The late night peanut butter, those kinds of things, then it's always felt like a moral failing, which is fine. Anyway, the point is, there can be different reasons. Now, turn it to finances for a moment. Do you remember that example I used to give that I learned from when I used to teach, host a session of Financial Peace University years ago? In that original Financial Peace University 20 years ago, Dave Ramsey gave the example of something about how, if your daughter or your niece, somebody that you really love, were diagnosed with an illness and you had to accumulate, maybe it was Brian Tracy, I don't know. Anyway, some smart person of the past that I used to listen to gave the example, and I used to use it all the time with clients. It said, if your daughter or your niece were diagnosed suddenly with some magical, very serious and incurable condition that was going to take her life a year from now, but there is a miraculous cure. I misspoke when I said incurable, right? There is a miraculous cure. There's one drug that could be purchased for this, to save her life. And she can take it up until the day before her death, 1 year from now. But the problem is the drug, nobody can pay for it with insurance. Nobody can pay for it with, you can't be given the money. You can't ask for the money. You have to earn and save the money. And that drug is, tens of thousands of dollars. Could you save $40,000 this year to save your daughter's life? Whenever I do this, I always make the numbers a stretch, but doable. And every single time, every person I've ever asked that question to has always said, yes, of course I could. Which basically, if the stakes are high enough, I could do it. And that's what seems different about the health experience, right? The stakes are really high. My biggest fear is having a stroke. I've had friends who've had strokes. I don't want to have a stroke. I don't want to get Alzheimer's disease, but I don't want to have a stroke. And that would be really frustrating, because if my brain were functioning, but I couldn't express it, then it would take a mountain of grace for me to be able to accept that. So I want to try to avoid a stroke. Well, if I'm going to avoid a stroke, that's going to require decades of focus for me. It's going to require decades of hard work for me to make certain that I'm in peak health. And then at least I'll know I've done my part in avoiding a stroke. So I think connecting with the motivation, what seems different about this attempt versus previous unsuccessful attempts is that it's very clear to me that this attempt has to be anchored in something that can continue for decades. So in aesthetics, you're thinking in terms of months and years. But with my fear about having a stroke and my caring about that, I have to have a plan that will work for decades. That leads me to talking about what doesn't work. I am fascinated by the question of, do diets work? And the answer to that question is going to come down to, how do we define work? What I will tell you is that diets have never worked for me because I have always succeeded in losing weight. And by the way, I'm fascinated. I think it's pretty clear that almost any diet can have you lose weight. They've literally done studies in which people just slept more. And when you sleep more, you lose weight. Right? You can go on a grapefruit diet. You can go on a potato diet. You can go on any diet will allow people to lose weight. But losing weight is not hard, but building a lifestyle that's sustainable is, and then getting proper nutrition. So diets don't work if by diet we mean something that can't be sustained for life. Now, not everything has to be sustained for life, right? You may go do bodybuilding or something and you say, I'm going to go on this 12-week cut or whatever it is, but I'm not in that world. The problem is not going to be losing weight. The problem is going to be how to become a lean person. And I find the parallel between that and money really interesting. Haven't you known people over the years who have succeeded in getting a good job or who have succeeded in having a windfall of some kind, and then a while later it's just all gone and they've basically sabotaged themselves? Why does that happen? Why does that happen? You've got to become a different person, which means that it's much more important for you to focus on becoming the kind of person who has the virtues of attracting money and of hanging on to it and being valuable in the marketplace, which is where income comes. Recognizing it may work out this year, may work out next year, but in the fullness of time, it'll work out, versus being the kind of person who chases after a short-term gain. One of the things that has become apparent to me as I've tried to analyze these unsuccessful attempts and the current attempt is that at this point in time, my goal is not to be on a diet, but actually to learn to eat in the same way that healthy and lean people eat, and to cause that to become intuitive for me, which is a double-sided statement. When I was younger, I'm so grateful for the internet. I'm so grateful for the ability that we have to have people communicate clarity and experience. I realized that I had some very erroneous ideas about life, especially with regard to being lean and healthy. I remember being in high school and looking at people who had great bodies and great abs, and in college and along the way. And I knew that people kind of worked out, but I just assumed that a lot of it was just the way that life was, and that the people didn't really do all that much different. And in my mind, I always associated this, again, when I state it clearly, it's clearly wrong, clearly fallacious, but we got to learn from our unsuccessful attempts. I always kind of assumed that once you were at a certain weight, once you had a certain kind of body, then you could just pretty much eat whatever you wanted. And so the goal of a diet was to lose enough weight to where you could just eat what you wanted. I'm embarrassed to say that I had that idea, that impression for years. And I looked at fit and healthy people, and I just kind of assumed it was easier for them. And there is an element of truth in which some things were easier for them, right? I think about the fit and healthy classmates that I had whose parents were fit and healthy. And I realized, oh, you know what? They had a family culture of doing healthy things. And so they didn't have to be trained to do that. Their idea of a good time as a family was to go out and play basketball together. as a family, which meant that everybody had a great time, everybody burned calories, and instead of bringing unhealthy food for the picnic, they would bring healthy food for the picnic. Whereas this wasn't my family, but let's just say it were, right? If my family's idea of a good time is to get together and watch a movie as a family, and we're going to eat unhealthy, high-calorie food instead of healthy food, then our families are going to look different. And so it is easier if you grow up in that healthy environment than in the unhealthy environment. But the point is still that the healthy people do it. And I remember a few years ago, I saw a video by a YouTube influencer named Brandon Carter. And Brandon Carter is this big jack dude. And he was doing this video on how he traveled with his food scale. And he told a story in a separate episode or video. He told a story about how he always takes his food scale everywhere with him. And he said, if you're going to get results, you never leave it to chance. You always make sure you get results. And I just thought, is there not a clearer example of how this particular fitness influencer makes certain that he always gets results because he always weighs his food and he always counts his calories? And is that not also the truth about everything that I know well in terms of money management? If you want to make certain that you always get rich, then you've got to know your numbers and you got to put in place systems that make sure that you always get rich. Did a show years ago, every day I want to get richer, every single day. Well, it's obviously the same system. That's the parallel. And the reason I appreciate the internet is because the internet has allowed us to kind of cross that personal barrier and listen to people who have the kinds of results that we want in a particular area of life and see why they have those results. And so when I was younger, I wouldn't necessarily go to a really fit person and ask them all the things that they do. And even if I did do that, by the way, they would have given me a modest answer. Just like if you go to a really wealthy person, you ask them all the things they do, the really wealthy person is going to give you a modest answer. The wealthy person is not going to say, yep, I work 70 hours a week no matter what. I always prioritize everything. They're going to give you some, I work hard type of thing. But the internet has allowed us to break that. And all of a sudden you discover that, well, certainly some people have higher metabolism than others. Some people it's easier than others. The truth is that nobody gets and stays fit by accident. Everybody finds some kind of system that works for them. The system might be doing a ton of cardio. The system might be carrying a ton of muscle. The system might be taking drugs every single day. The system might be weighing every single mouth, but they have a system. And so you got to have a system. Now the question is, some people's system is not explicit. Rather, it's just this person intuitively knows, right? I have family members like this. They're never overweight. Why? Well, they just eat a little bit less if their pants start getting a little tight, and it works out. But it's never worked that way for me. Here's another lesson I've learned. A few years ago, I read a book. The book was called Willpower by Roy Bauermeister. And I later learned that a lot of the research in the book was discredited. I thought it was really interesting, but unfortunately, a lot of it seems to have been discredited with kind of the social science replication crisis. But there was a chapter in the book that he threw in that felt a little bit random, but the chapter was, why don't diets work? Or basically, why diets don't work. And I listened to this chapter. And the basic argument that he said diets don't work because they train people to ignore the basic cues of their body. They train people to ignore what their body actually needs. And it was like a light bulb went on for me. I said, wow, that's the story of my life. When I was younger, I was encouraged to finish my plate. So I learned to clean my plate, regardless of whether I were hungry or not. I don't blame my parents for that. I don't think they made me fat, but I just learned to do that. And then I developed a habit of going and eating things because they looked good or they were attractive, not paying attention to whether I was hungry or not. And then over the years, I would go on diets. And when you're on a diet, you train yourself to not eat when you're hungry because I'm on a diet. Or you train yourself to not eat that because it's not on my diet. So you basically train yourself to not listen to your body until something happens and it kind of all blows up, in which case you go out and you start scarfing food down because there's like this dam is broken. You have this messed up psychology that, well, I've cheated now. I might as well make it really a good cheat and then start again tomorrow. And you go on and you don't listen to your body and you don't stop when your body says to stop. And that's the story of my life. I remember my wife has this funny thing that she does where she says, my stomach says it wants a bowl of ice cream. And in our first years of marriage, I made fun of her for that. I just thought it was goofy, one of her goofy things. But as I've lived with her now for, I don't know how long of it, almost 15 years. As I've lived with her now for 14 years, and I'm not sure how long I've been married. The truth is that when she says my stomach says it wants such and such, she's right. And she's not overweight. She's never been overweight because she listens to what her body says. And I don't know the perfect parallel for that over to money, because I think money is one where we can be just more like hyper disciplined, but there's probably some parallels of that intuitive aspect as well. Just to say that one of my goals is to learn how to listen to my body, which is another reason for kind of going slow and steady. Because if I could learn how to listen to my body, then I could be the kind of person who is lean and healthy for the rest of his life, rather and who knows how to maintain it and who is not dependent on a particular crutch. But in the meantime, in order to do that, I'd have to build awareness. And so I've been working hard to build awareness. We're really in a great period where we can apply good technology to this problem at this point in time. And we didn't used to have this technology. So what do I mean? Well, the first thing is, from the food perspective, we have a bunch of really great apps that are really useful. And so you can put your food into an app. And even over the last year or two, there's been a great transformation with AI. A few years ago, I had, of course, for a while, we've had easy access to cameras. And so I thought, okay, I'll just take a picture of all my food. But you couldn't really do anything with that in the past. Now you can pull out your camera. You can snap a picture of the food on your plate. You can feed that into an AI. There's an AI function in most of the modern diet tracking apps. But you could just feed it into an AI and say, estimate the calories for me. And while it's not going to be perfect, I can promise you that if you are overweight, then that AI app is going to be better at estimating the calories than you are. And so that's something that is really, really powerful. I figured, you know what? If Brandon Carter can travel with his food scale, I can probably use mine. And so I weigh my food. I don't think that's a really sustainable thing for the long term, but I've been weighing my food. We're really in a golden age with those tools alone to be aware of calories, which is really, really impactful. I remember years ago when I first started with Atkins in 8th grade, I had to open up the back of the book and I didn't know what things were worth and try to estimate, here's what this is, here's what this weight is, here's what that weight is or amount is. And it was all estimates. Today, we can be much more precise, which is valuable. When you add that precision over to movement trackers, then we really are starting to get some good results. So I use an Apple Watch. You might use an Oura Ring or a Whoop Band or whatever the other versions of that. There's lots of competitors for that now, or just a pedometer on your belt. If you have just some way to calculate what your overall activity level is on a particular day, that can be really helpful. I really think the Apple ecosystem here is wonderful. I can pop open my fitness rings. I can look at the move number and it'll give me an estimate for my basal metabolic rate based upon my current height and my weight, plus the amount of calories that I have, that I can do with my moving. I use Chronometer to track my calories, and it'll update my calories on a daily basis. And I can see that pop up on my home screen of here's how many calories I've eaten today. And it's really, really effective because I can be sure now that I'm in a caloric deficit, that I know that I'm actually in a caloric deficit. I'm not going to leave it to chance. And that's really powerful. Similarly, it's become so wonderfully convenient now to get data on yourself. And so something like a scale, I have a scale that connects to Wi-Fi, so it automatically goes into Apple Health. That's a big winner. My doctor recommended for me a blood pressure cuff, which was great. I have what's it called? A iHealth blood pressure cuff. That's like a calibrated blood pressure cuff that connects to my phone. So I can take my blood pressure multiple times per day and just observe it. That's helping to keep me on track as well, because I'm motivated by those health aspects. We can, of course, do blood tests, and then we have the whole world of AI at our fingertips. And so I have all my stuff set up in Claude so that I export all my Apple Health data into Claude. I have it set up so that all of my stuff is tracked there. I've been in the gym lifting, and so I have all my workout data there. And so I have Claude looking at that all the time. ChatGPT just announced a new feature where it'll integrate with Apple Health directly, and so that's really great. That is increasing there, that we can apply AI, and this is great because not everybody has access to a good coach or can afford it necessarily, but with good AI tools, man, you got a 136 IQ friend that has access to the whole world of information, and he's probably not perfect, but it's a good start to turn AI onto what you're doing. It's a good place to begin with. And so I've really been trying to build these tools because I realized everything about what I do and what I perceive is broken, right? Nothing works. If it worked, I'd be fit and healthy, right? I'd be lean and healthy, but I'm not. And so I'm going to use these tools to figure out how to pay attention to them. And then hopefully over time, I'll be really skilled. And again, the obvious parallel to money here is that if your life is a mess, then you're going to have to engage in some extreme structure. You're going to have to engage in, if you're going to count your calories, you're going to have to track your money, track every dollar, write it down. And over time, you won't have to do that 10 years from now, probably, but you got to do it today. And you've got to gain awareness of it and study it and spend time with it. Let me talk about calorie counting for a moment. I've learned a lot over the last couple of months that I didn't expect to learn about calorie counting. And what I've realized is that all of my instincts with regard to food are wrong and broken because of my previous fixation on carbohydrates. I've always thought that the scientific arguments for the low carbohydrate, low glucose kind of insulin spike theory just sounds so scientifically compelling to me. And of course, a lot of that was spearheaded by Atkins and several along his time. And it has just seemed like over the last decade that all of that has become true. And that, plus I used to do a lot of fasting. And so I used to watch Cole Robinson, and I would do kind of extreme snake diet fasting and get quick results with that as well, which I liked a lot. And I used to do the OMAD thing, right? Jacob Lund-Fisker wrote about that in his book, Early Retirement Extreme. And I checked it out, and I did the 1 meal a day thing for a long time. And so all of the science of it just seemed like over the years, the science that was getting better and better. And I always laughed at the calorie counting folks. I never did calorie counting, but it's been sobering to me to look at and realize that all of my weight gain can be accounted for by calories. And that every time I actually count my calories and weigh my food, I always wind up in a surplus. And then all of a sudden, I don't need to go and blame my hormones or blame some weird scientific trick. It's right here, right? It's the calories. And so this time around, I'm doing calorie counting. And what I discovered is that all of my instincts are broken. I had an experience a month or so ago. I sent my coach pictures of all my food. And I was eating some sausage that we'd gotten from the store. And on a low carb diet, sausage is a health food. right? Because it's very low carbohydrates and it has lots of fat. And the theory is that fat leads to satiety. And so you have this sausage and it's a health food. And when I used to do carnivore, I could eat lots of food. And you start to look at meat and you wind up eating a lot of it. But when you count calories, you look at a sausage and all of a sudden you recognize, wow, that thing is 300 calories. And when I finish 2 of them, I don't feel very full. On a low carb diet, I wind up looking at things like fruit as the enemy, right? Because if you've got 30 to 50 carbohydrates of net carbs per day, that's your budget, you can't blow it on an apple. It's just not enough. But then all of a sudden you recognize, man, an apple is 50 calories or 75 calories. I can eat a bunch of them. And so I've gone through all these foods and I've recognized that all of my instincts have been broken by all that low carb dieting. Now, I'm not opining on the science of low carbing and fasting and all that stuff. I'm just saying that all of my previous attempts using those tools have been unsuccessful for me. They've been successful for a lot of other people. They've been unsuccessful for me. And I'm not insane, so I'm going to try something different. And that really, that matters, right? Parallel to money. So many times I've watched people get convinced of the truth of a position. Sometimes it's, hard money versus fiat money. Sometimes it's, they're going to screw you with inflation and you got to go and buy this asset or follow this plan here, or everyone has to run a business or whatever. And man, I've worked with so many people over the years. You just hear this stuff and immediately kind of the guard goes up. And it's not that there's something necessarily wrong with that. Is it true that fiat money has inflation and goes down in value? Yes, it's true. But it's the what do you do with it? And I think the same thing is true with regard to diet and health, is that everything is basically built around calories. But there are different kinds of calories and there are different quantities of calories and there's different ways for different people based upon different approaches to apply those calories. But the reality is probably true that it is calories in, calories out. Like that is the model. Just like with money, it's make more, spend less, invest the difference. That's increase income, decrease expenses, and invest wisely, right? That's the model. That's the model that works. And the tweaks, when they're made intelligently around the edges, are really good. But when you get so fixated on the tweaks, they don't wind up working very well. Finally, let's talk about drugs. When I got that high blood pressure notification, I spent some time thinking about it. And of course, the revolution in the marketplace right now has been the development and application of modern weight loss drugs. And these things truly seem incredible, right? Truly amazing. You talk to somebody who's gone on Ozempic or Retta or whatever, and you listen to their story and the amount of, I'm convinced probably the amount of lives that are being saved by these drugs is truly, truly astonishing. And it's a wonderful, wonderful new invention. I have not used drugs of that kind. About the most extravagant that I've gotten is that I started taking creatine. So that's my very wild, cutting edge supplementation schedule. But I've not used them. But I said a few months ago to myself, I made a vow. I said, or just a resolve. I said, I cannot continue in the way that I'm continuing. It's not fair to my family. It's not fair to my children. It's not fair to my wife. It's not fair to my other family members. It's not fair to my ancestors, and it's not fair to me. So either I find a permanent solution and learn how to actually be a lean and healthy and fit and athletic man, or I will take drugs. I will take one of the drugs. And I know doesn't have to be all or nothing, but I would rather learn to be the different person and avoid the drugs. what's my point about the drugs? I guess just that it really is, but I don't think that's necessary for everyone. And so to the extent that I have any advice to give, which I don't, I would just have some stories to share. But to the extent that I have any advice to give, what I would say is find a way to do something. And positive progress tends to snowball and become more positive progress. And that's super attractive. So I think that if what's motivating to you is learning to run can lead to your losing weight. Your losing weight can lead to your doing calisthenics, leads you to be stronger, which leads you to be a better runner, and blah, blah, blah. It can become a cycle. And I think that the modern suite of weight loss drugs, GLPs, and things that we all have increasing levels of access to may be just the tool that you need to push the envelope just a little bit, to move it off of yourself. And sometimes we're so, the parallel to money here is imperfect. But what I've observed over the years is that there's some of us who are so ideologically constrained that we wind up cutting off a body part to spite ourselves. And so if you have an opportunity to go and make a bundle of cash, go take it. Right? If you have an opportunity to save a bunch of money by doing something radical and lower your expenses, go do it. That doesn't mean that you're going to do it that way forever. As I thought about the weight loss drugs, I was talking to a friend of mine who had lost a ton of weight with one of the GLPs that is not yet FDA approved. And he was just sharing, like, it was such a valuable thing for him to be able to start. And then once he was able to get started on that pathway, then he's been able to learn new habits so that he can continue to maintain his his health and his weight without the drug. And it seems amazingly good and amazingly healthy for him. And so, I'm not opposed to using drugs in the future. I'm so far not doing it. I don't think it's necessary. And I'm willing to go slowly, and my body's responding. I just got to get rid of this visceral fat and continue going. And I'm on the right track. So, but a lot of times in life, you need something to break you free. And so I have observed over the years that if you could just get a little bit of momentum going, if you could just live radical for a time, right? If you could just move into the RV or live in the back of your car, or if you could just go and get the sales job and work 100 hours a week, or go and get 3 jobs and just work. A few months of that can break you free, and then you can come back to it. But you don't want to go on year after year after year and not get momentum, right? You don't want to allow 6 years to go along with just, well, here I am going through the motions. Imagine if I had paid attention 2 years ago or 4 years ago. Imagine where I'd be today. And I've done a pretty good job of that financially. I've not done a good job with my weight, but I've done a pretty good job of that financially. I just want to tell you that living radically for a time is a good move because it can push you off of 0. And going from 0 to 1 is a lot harder than going from 1 to 10 in many cases. So use the drugs that they get you started if you don't have another alternate plan. Use a radical plan, right? Go get 3 jobs. Do it on your money. Do something to break you loose. Because momentum is so valuable and so encouraging to a human that it's really worth getting. So, I said at the beginning, I didn't mean to be away from the microphone for a month. It actually has been a goal for a long time. One of my long-term goals has been to work in January, February, and March, take April off, work May, June, July, take August off, work September, October, November, take December off. I've wanted that for a decade. I've never gotten to it. Maybe within the next couple of years, maybe I'll get to it. But it has been nice to just take a little break from the microphone. I've not been off. I've been working nonstop on my other projects. But I just wanted to start with, I guess I just wanted to close by saying, or I wanted to say that to say that I waited until I was making some progress. I'm a couple months in, and I've been feeling a lot better. One of the things that's interesting is it's been a really hard year, and I'm the one who made it hard. So it's just been a really hard year. Young baby. I had some challenges with our other children that have required a huge amount of attention, multiple businesses, various setbacks, all kinds of problems, all kinds of challenges. And it's a lot to the number of people who in some way depend upon me has increased quite a lot. And that takes a while to get used to. That's a new thing, right? It's not just my children, it's other people. And so it's hard to be strong enough and good enough to bear that, right? It just makes me want to run for the mountains half the time and just go live in a shack somewhere. But I don't believe that would be honorable for me to do that. But a few months ago, anyway, it's been a hard year. And then to make it all worse, I went into one of my kind of down cycles for a few months. And that happens frequently, right? I call it the blackness. Basically, it's just feeling super negative, super depressed, super frustrated. And I always deal with it, right? I just kind of press through. I have my things that usually work, and then you just wait it out. And then after a few months, things get better, things get cheerier, etc. I didn't ever think that those things could have some kind of physical intervention. It's interesting. My coach, Dr. Shori, he talks about like energy and whatnot as actually being, basically you can build energy from food, right? Right. Being healthy and eating healthy food and eating a high energy diet really can make a difference in the long-term results that you get. And so I think I've been experiencing that more and more, and that's really encouraging. I have a podcast planned for coming days called All Wealth is Biological. And it's not related to health it's not related to weight loss in this context. But basically, if there's something that you can do to improve your health, I think that's really great. And I'll tell you, the way I feel now versus the way I felt a couple months ago of just my ability to do things, right? The blackness seems to have receded. I feel positive and energetic again. And when you realize that life is basically just about energy, in terms of feeling energetic enough to do it. I have always been blessed with good health. That was why this recent downturn has been very sobering for me, because every time I've ever gotten sick, I've always been so grateful that I'm rarely sick, and just appreciated how anybody who has chronic sickness, chronic disease, chronic difficulty has been able to work through that and build in the midst of it. My hat's off to those people. I just have so much respect for that. But the difference between feeling good and the energy that you have to apply to your projects is astonishing. The difference between feeling filled with energy and being able to apply that to business, to investing, to getting out of debt, to working, to that is so astonishing. Everything flows from how we feel. And so I really do think that investing in our health and finding some kind of functional solution that's going to work for the long term, investing in our health has to be at the top of the list. And I think it will pay off in spades to do so. So I'm motivated. I'm encouraged. I'm sure I'll go through ups and downs. I'm sure there'll be setbacks, but if any of these lessons have been useful for you, I hope they have been. I have spent 30 years having various unsuccessful attempts to unfat myself. And I'm optimistic that come back in 4 or 5 years and I will have a successful attempt to unfat myself. But I tell you what, no matter what, I will not stop and I will not quit. If whatever I'm doing now doesn't work, I will not give up. And I will keep on trying something else. I'll try to learn from it. I'm just trying to share some of the lessons I've learned with you in hopes they would be useful and helpful to you in some way. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back with you soon.